Ready to get back into our Father's Word here at the chapel. We've got a new book for you today. We're going to start the book of Samuel today. Many of you with King James Version Bibles, perhaps even other Bibles, the title of it is the first book of Samuel. Many of your Bibles will read otherwise called the first book of Kings. And in fact, the Latin translation of the Bible, the Vulgate, you would have it listed as 1 Kings only, 2 Samuel becoming 2 Kings, and therefore 1st and 2nd Kings being 3rd and 4th Samuel. And don't want to confuse you, but that's the way it was done. The Septuagint, an older translation than the Vulgate, which was a Greek translation of the Bible, was the first time that it was actually treated as two books, 1 Samuel and 2 Samuel, the same with 1 Kings and 2 Kings, 1 Chronicles and 2 Chronicles. And the reason that this came about was in the Hebrew Bible, when they wrote it on, they didn't have bound books like we have today. The Bible was on a scroll or a roll, you could think of it, either made of papyrus, perhaps even some of them made out of leather, other materials that then they could write on. But what happened when they translated the Hebrew Bible into Greek, it takes more space to write the Greek language. So in effect, when they got to the end of the scroll, what else could they do? They had to start a second scroll. And so that's how the 1 Samuel and 2 Samuel, and indeed it should be treated as one book, not two. In the Hebrew language, the Bible was divided, the books of the Bible are divided into a phrase known as sederim. And a seder was a prescribed reading for one sitting, if you will. If you started at a seder, you completed the seder before you stopped your study for that particular period of time. The 20th seder, we'll find when we get to the end of 1 Samuel, doesn't end at the end of 1 Samuel. It continues on into chapter 2 of 2 Samuel. So it wasn't by design that this happened. It's simply the fact that when the scroll was full, they had to start another scroll. And it was not a good place that they made the division, but what else do? You start another scroll, and that's how that came to be. I think it's very important to note that the Samuel and Kings are the same events in many cases as recorded in Chronicles. However, the books of Samuel and the books of Kings are more from man's perspective, or a man's eye view, or recording of the history that occurred. Whereas Chronicles, and you have an appendix, if you have a companion Bible, you're fortunate, Appendix 56, does a outline of all the scriptures that are recorded in Samuel and Chronicles, or Kings and Chronicles, or all three books. And consistently, from God's point of view in Chronicles, or the Holy Spirit's point of view, if you will, in Chronicles, it becomes very apparent that there's a big difference. For example, King Hezekiah, one of the more righteous kings of Judah, and they had quit having Passover, but Hezekiah reinstituted the Passover. However, in the book of Kings, you find a whopping 3 verses on this subject, and the religious reformation brought about by Hezekiah, where you have 3 chapters dedicated to it in the book of Chronicles. So always you see also in Samuel and Kings, the importance of what man did is more important than what God did. In other words, you'd see in Samuel and Kings the efforts of the military or the leaders of the nation, their accomplishments recorded. However, in Chronicles, it's always the actions of the Levites, the priests, or those who are in a religious leadership role that are highlighted and brought out more than what man did. So that's interesting to note. So with that, let's go to 1061 BC. I invite you to come with me to 1061 BC. Samson has just recently been fighting against the Philistines, who had Israel under their thumb. Israel was suffering much oppression. And with all of the judges, and by the way, we're going to see the history of Samuel. We're going to see the last two judges of Israel. That would be Eli and Samuel. And then also the first man king, Saul, is introduced, and that mostly being the history that's recorded. So what we see in Samuel is we're getting ready to go from a theocracy to a monarchy. In other words, where God is in control, or someone appointed by God, not to say that the kings weren't, but in a monarchy, the king is seen, or queen as the case may be, is seen as the ultimate ruler, if you will, and leaving God out of the picture. Anytime you leave God out of the picture, you're bound for trouble. And that was the way with the judges. Back to the time of Joshua, Israel had judges. And it wasn't a continuous thing where you constantly had a judge. Only when Israel was oppressed and the people cried out to God, and then he would send a deliverer. Samuel will be one of the deliverers, the greatest deliverers, if you will, therefore making him a type for Jesus Christ of all time. So, but the judges always brought about by God because Israel messed up. They'd move away from God and start focusing on the things of the world, the things of the flesh, if you will. And as I said a moment ago, if you leave God out of the equation, you're going to have trouble. You're not going to receive God's blessings. But always Israel would cry out to God, and he would send a deliverer. In the Hebrew language, a judge is shofetim, and it comes from the prime shaphat. And I like the definition of that word. A judge sets things right and then rules. And that's what happens. When the people are going the wrong way, a leader has to set things right and then rule. Make sure the people stay focused on what it is that God would have them do. That way the nation receives God's blessings. Well, we can put that into perspective in our lives today, can we not? You know, we do things God's way, we receive his blessings. But when we start taking God out of our schools, when we start trying to remove God from our vocabulary, when we want to take "in God we trust" off of our coins, for example, you're headed in the wrong direction. Then we see things such as shootings in the schools, and we wonder why. What's wrong? What have we done wrong here? And we took God out of the schools. And then we allow gays in our military openly. We have same-sex marriages. And then we wonder why the fires are burning out of control in the West. The superstorms are hitting our eastern seaboard, even as this program is being recorded at this time. And we wonder why these things happen until a deliverer comes along. I think our next deliverer will be Jesus Christ himself when he returns, and he sets things right and rules. So with that introduction, let's ask that word of wisdom as we always do. In Jesus' precious name, Father, we ask you to open eyes, open ears this day as we begin the book of 1 Samuel. Let's go with chapter 1, verse 1, and it reads, Now there was a certain man of Ramatha-Imzophim of Mount Ephraim, Ephraim being, of course, the larger of the 12 tribes of Israel, and his name was Elkanah, the son of Jeroham, the son of Elihu, the son of Tohu, the son of Zuph, and Ephrathite. Now, Elkanah is a name peculiar to Levites, and more specifically to the family, the portion of the Levites known as the Kohathites. The Kohathites is when Israel came out of Egypt and went into the Promised Land. God did not give the Levites an inheritance in the land. They didn't get a possession of land, but rather God distributed them out throughout the land of Israel. The Kohathites, for the most part, ended up in the tribes of Manasseh and Ephraim and Dan. So pretty good bet that Elkanah, who we're going to find is the father of Samuel, was of the tribe of Levi. Verse 2. And he had 2 wives. The name of the one was Hannah, which means grace, if you translate it, and the name of the other, Peninnah, which means coral, or it could be translated pearl. And Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. Hannah was barren, and we're going to find out she was barren because that was by God's design. There was a purpose in Hannah being barren. Verse 3. And this man, that's Elkanah, went out of his city yearly to worship and to sacrifice unto the Lord of hosts in Shiloh. And the 2 sons of Eli, Eli being the judge at this time and also the high priest, Hophni and Phinehas, the priest of the Lord, were there. So we see Elkanah was a religious man. He obeyed the law, and at this time the Ark of the Covenant and the altar was at Shiloh. And once a year, all the men of Israel by law were required to go and make sacrifice to Yahweh at this time where the ark was located in Shiloh. The ark is not going to be in Shiloh much longer. It's going to fall into the hands of the enemy, as we'll see as we work our way through 1 Samuel. Now, Hophni and Phinehas, when we get to chapter 2, we're going to learn that they were a couple of real characters. They were not righteous priests at all, and we're going to see that they weren't doing things God's way, and that was a reason for a big part of the problems that Israel was having at this time. Now, how Eli became a high priest is also a matter of discussion among the scholars. The priest line was the high priest line was supposed to be through Aaron's 3rd son, Eleazar, and that because of the zealousness of Phinehas, not the Phinehas, the son of Eli, Phinehas, the son of Eleazar. Eli, as we're going to find out, was not a descendant from Eleazar or Phinehas. He was a descendant of Aaron's 4th son, Ithamar. Now, whether there was not a man of the tribe of Eleazar's descendants through Phinehas old enough to be the priest, it's not known. It's not written anywhere in the Bible how this change from Eleazar's family to Ithamar's family came about. It won't last for long, as we'll see. Verse 4. And when the time was that Elkanah offered, he gave to Peninnah his wife, and to all her sons and her daughters portions. Now this is the peace offering, which after the wave shoulder and the heave breast were lifted off and given to the priest for their portion of the peace offering, then it was up to the offerers to divide up the rest, and it was a very special communion with the Lord, seeing this peace meal that you had. You gave God his portion of your offering, and then you sat down basically at the same table and partook of the offering yourself. So he gave Peninnah portions, plural, you notice, sufficient for her children. Verse 5. But unto Hannah he gave a worthy portion. This means he gave a double portion. In other words, he loved Hannah as if she had given him children. For he loved Hannah, but the Lord had shut up her womb. Who had shut up her womb? And it was for a purpose. Yahweh had shut her womb. We're going to see that what the Lord shuts, he can open as well. Verse 6. And her adversary, this is Elkanah's other wife, Peninnah, also provoked her sore, for to make her fret, because the Lord had shut up her womb. Now this fret, it's not really to be angry, it's more to be irritated or upset. And in other words, I think what's happening here is, and it didn't say that this happened continuously, it was only when the family went to Shiloh and Elkanah gave a double portion to Hannah. And I think Peninnah became jealous at this because Elkanah was more or less showing favoritism to Hannah, possibly because he loved her more. Verse 7, and as he did so year by year, this is referring to Elkanah, when she went up to the house of the Lord, so she provoked her, therefore she wept and did not eat. It was very upsetting to Hannah that there was this adversarial relationship. You see, it seems, not only seems, it is odd to us in this time that a man would have more than one wife. But at the time of this writing and the time of these events, it was very common for a man to have more than one wife. And when you think about it, they probably all thought of themselves as one large family. And when there's an adversarial relationship in the family, you know how upsetting that is and how much trouble it can cause when you have strife among your own family. It causes problems. And it was upsetting to Hannah that this happened. The tears were a way for her to vent this irritation. Verse 8, then said Elkanah, her husband, to her, Hannah, why weepest thou? And why eatest thou not? And why is thy heart grieved? Am not I better to thee than 10 sons? This kind of loses it in the translation. What Elkanah is saying here, aren't I just as good to you or better to you than if you had given me 10 sons, is what he's saying here. And after all, he was giving her a double portion, although she wasn't partaking of one portion because she was so upset over the adversarial relationship caused by Peninnah giving her grief. Verse 9. So Hannah rose up after they had eaten in Shiloh. Shiloh, by the way, means rest. I hope you put your rest in Jesus Christ. And after they had drunk, it was common to have wine with the sacrificial meal, the peace offering. Now Eli, the priest, sat upon a seat by a post of the temple of the Lord. And again, Eli is not just a priest, he's the high priest at this particular time. And the sacrificial meal is complete. Hannah is about to take her troubled heart to the Lord. And remember, Eli, the high priest, is nearby watching to see what's going on. Verse 10, and she was in bitterness of soul, and prayed unto the Lord, and wept sore. And after you have done, you can do this yourself in your life. Excuse me, when you've done all you can do in regards to a particular situation, take it to the Lord in prayer. And that's exactly what Hannah is doing here. Verse 11. And she vowed a vow, this means she made a solemn vow, and said, O Lord of hosts, if thou wilt indeed look upon the affliction of thine handmaid, and remember me and not forget. And if you have a companion Bible, you'll have a note that this is a pleonasm, which means that what is said immediately put in opposite words, and it adds great emphasis. You'll find that in Appendix 6 of your companion Bible. Remember me and not forget thine handmaid, but will give unto thine handmaid a man-child. Then I will give him unto the Lord all the days of his life, and there shall no razor come upon his head. And 2 promises made in that. She's one stating she will dedicate her son to the service of the Lord forever, for his whole life. Also, he's going to be set apart as a Nazirite. And the vow of a Nazirite was not necessarily lifelong. It could be a specified period of time, less than that. But she is making this vow on her son for his entire life. And of course, the vow of a Nazirite, that was that he would not cut his hair, or her hair, in the case may be, and also that he would not partake of the vine. So that was you'll find those vows in Numbers chapter 6, if you're not familiar with that. Excuse me, verse 12. And it came to pass, as she continued praying before the Lord, that Eli marked her mouth. In other words, he was close enough that he was watching what was going on. And he saw Hannah's mouth moving, but she wasn't speaking out to be heard of man. She was mouthing the words, but God knew her heart, and God knew what she was saying. The very name Samuel means asked of God or heard of God. And this very pious woman, Hannah, is asking of God a man-child. God is going to hear and not only grant her wish, but give another deliverer to the nation of Israel to deliver them from the oppression of the Philistines. Verse 13. Now Hannah, she spake in her heart, only her lips moved, but her voice was not heard. Therefore Eli thought she had been drunken. Here all these people have been partaking of the sacrificial meal and drinking wine, and he thinks she's drunk. And this also goes to show that even the high priest can assume and make a mistake, and he has made a mistake in this case. The others had been drinking, Hannah had not. Verse 14. And Eli said unto her, How long wilt thou be drunken? Put away thy wine from thee. Go away, woman, and sleep it off. Sober up. And Hannah answered and said, No, my lord, I am a woman of a sorrowful spirit. I have drunk neither wine nor strong drink, but have poured out my soul before the Lord. I'm not drunk. I know exactly what I'm doing, and I'm taking my troubles to the Lord in prayer. Count not thine handmaid for a daughter of Belial. Belial means worthless or lawless, and therefore it's usually associated with Satan or the devil himself. For out of the abundance of my complaint, this could be translated meditation, and grief have I spoken hitherto. It's my heart speaking, not the wine speaking. Then Eli answered and said, Go in peace, and the God of Israel grant thee thy petition that thou hast asked of him. Asked of God, the very name Samuel there, and God has heard, and God will answer. Verse 18. And she said, Let thine handmaid find grace. That's her name in the Hebrew language. Hannah means grace. In thy sight. So the woman went her way and did eat, and her countenance was no more sad. She had the faith to know that God had heard her prayer and that he was going to answer her request, and Samuel would be the answer to that. Verse 19. And they rose up in the morning early, and worshipped before the Lord, and returned, and came to their house to Ramah. And Elkanah knew Hannah his wife, and the Lord remembered her. And she conceived that man-child that she had asked of the Lord. 20. Wherefore it came to pass, when the time was come about, this come about, you could think of it as, in the Hebrew language, it means a revolution of days. In other words, Elkanah knew his wife and went into her, and then after the revolution of days of 9 months, after Hannah had conceived, that she bare a son, and called his name Samuel, saying, Because I have asked him of the Lord. And Yahweh heard and answered her prayer, once again sending a deliverer to Israel. You know, probably on the line of Moses, too, you have to place Samuel as far as being an intercessor, and Moses and Samuel only under Jesus Christ himself on the level of intercessors, because it would be Samuel who would intercede between God and the people of Israel and set them on a right path and rule, being the last judge of Israel. 21. And the man Elkanah and all his house went up to offer unto the Lord the yearly sacrifice with his vow. Now, we heard about Hannah taking a vow, but nothing was said or written earlier about Elkanah taking a vow. But here it's very plain that evidently Elkanah made a vow himself concerning all of this. What that is was not written. 22. But Hannah went not up, for she said unto her husband, I will not go up until the child be weaned, and then I will bring him, that he may appear before the Lord, and there abide forever. Some disagreement among scholars as far as what this be weaned means as far as his age is concerned. Some would have, Elkanah and Hannah showing up at Shiloh when Samuel was 3 years old. I don't think Eli would have been very appreciative, and we probably would have sent the child home and said, what help do you think a 3-year-old could be? I go along with the scholars who think that that this means that he was able to be on his own. In other words, the word in the Hebrew, gamal, by implication means to ripen or be mature. We find the word in 2 Maccabees in the Apocrypha, chapter 7, verse 27, and it means a period of nourishment and upbringing. So I think Hannah probably got Samuel up to the age of 10, 11, 12, something along that, and then she followed through on her promise to dedicate him to the service at the sanctuary in Shiloh. Verse 23, And Elkanah, her husband, said unto her, Do what seemeth thee good. Tarry until thou have weaned him. Only the Lord establish his word. So the woman abode and gave her son suck until she weaned him. Now, this fact that, between the ages of 3 and 12 years old, the Levites would normally begin service in the sanctuary at this particular time of these events at the age of 25. Prior times, the age was 30, and then at the time of David, that was changed from 25 to 20. So, again, he began service probably around the age of 10, 11, 12. Verse 24, And when she had weaned him, she took him up with her with 3 bullocks, and 1 ephah of flour, and a bottle of wine, and brought him unto the house of the Lord in Shiloh. And the child was young, and one of these bullocks would have been for a burnt offering, consecrating Samuel to the service of the Lord. The other 2 would have been for Elkanah's normal burnt offering, and also the third being for the peace offering, which is the one that was split up for the sacrificial meal. Verse 25, And they slew a bullock and brought the child to Eli, this being the one consecrating Samuel into the service of the sanctuary. He said, O my Lord, as thy soul liveth, my Lord, I am the woman that stood by thee, here praying unto the Lord. And this being directed to Eli, the high priest. She's saying, remember 10, 11, 12 years ago, I'm the one that you thought was drunk and told me to leave. And I told you my heart, and you heard and asked the Lord that my request be granted. And God kept his end of the bargain, and I'm here keeping my end, my promise, which was to dedicate Samuel to the service of the Lord and also to the vow of a Nazirite for life. Verse 27, "For this child I prayed, and the Lord hath given me my petition which I asked of him." Verse 28 to complete the chapter, "Therefore also I have lent," or this word better translated, "I've returned him to the Lord. As long as he liveth, he shall be lent to the Lord." And he worshiped the Lord there. Samuel began to worship the Lord there at the sanctuary. Samuel will become the last judge of Israel, and just after Samuel, we'll move into that monarchy with Saul becoming the first man king. Now in chapter 2, the first 10 verses, we're going to see that it's Hannah's prayer or song, if you will, of praise to the Lord. And then the remainder of chapter 2 is dedicated to recording the ungodliness of the sons of Eli, that being those two named already by name in this chapter 1, Hophni and Phinehas. So we'll come back in our next lecture and cover that, and I hope you'll listen to this brief message. We have a short message. We'll ask you to listen a moment, won't you please?